Is your music confusing your congregation or gently leading them along? That's what we're discussing today on Dr. Doug's Daily Tips for how to write great LDS church music. To help us, we're going to use hymn 121 from the LDS hymnal, I'm a Pilgrim, I'm a Stranger, by Leroy Robertson. This is a beautiful hymn. However, warning, there is a danger in this hymn. In fact, the composer himself, Leroy Robertson, who had a PhD in classical music composition, who studied with the great Arnold Schoenberg, one of the greatest composers of the 20th century, a master of composition, admitted that later in his life that he went a little too far with this hymn. My first teacher, Dr. Darwin Wolford, was a student of Leroy Robertson, this composer, and Robertson admitted to my teacher that he went a little bit too far in this hymn and wished that he could go back and not be flexing his composer muscles so much. Because in a way, it really does kind of confuse the congregation, which is my belief as to why we almost never hear this. I don't think I've ever heard this hymn in Sacrament Meeting in my entire life. Now, don't get me wrong, it's beautiful. There are some beautiful things here and some wonderful techniques. But he does take one technique, for my taste, a little bit too far for congregational singing. So we're going to look at perhaps what not to do, although it's an excellent technique that I hope you'll learn. So it's kind of like, well, here's a cool technique, use it sparingly. Okay, so that's a little introduction. Now let's look at the technique. As we go through this hymn, there are a few spots that use a very interesting and very useful in many situations technique called linear chromaticism. So chromaticism, there we go. Chromaticism is notes outside of the key signature. Linear as opposed to functional. Let's define those. In traditional music, we have functional harmony, meaning the 1 chord goes to the 4 chord, the 4 chord goes to the 2 chord, the 2 chord goes to the 5 chord. We have these progressions that generally follow the circle of fifths. That's traditional functional harmony. Well, you can also have some functional chromaticism that also follows the logic of the circle of fifths, but then there's this other kind of chromaticism which is featured in this hymn called linear chromaticism, and it's when chromatic notes appear and continue in the same linear fashion with no sense of proper function in tonality. In other words, they don't go from like the 1 chord goes to the 4 chord, the 4 chord goes to the 2 chord. It ignores those rules completely. Now, this is a technique that made composers like Bach and later, to even greater fame, Chopin, quite famous. The sad sound that you get in any of Chopin's music is very, very often due to this kind of linear chromaticism. Now, there is one hymn in our hymn book that uses this sparingly, and it's More Holiness Give Me. No, excuse me, Where Can I Turn for Peace? There's one instance of linear chromaticism in Where Can I Turn for Peace, and that's enough. The problem in this hymn is it's used a little too much. Okay, so let's zoom in and look at what is this linear chromaticism. As you can see here, this first little area, here's what it sounds like. Those left-hand notes, it's a little bit barbershoppy, but it does not follow the function of what an F sharp should do in this music. The F sharp should go back to G. It's like a leading tone, but it doesn't. Instead, it continues on in the same path in this linear chromaticism way. Well, okay, one instance of that, fine, beautiful. But then we get it again at the end of the first line, going to the second line, so I'll zoom out a little bit. So we get to Rocky Shore. Now that chord, F, B, now natural slides down, so the F and the bass and the B natural and the D, they all slide down by a half step. And then again, so we get this. That is heavy linear chromaticism, and it's like 3 in a row. It's a lot. It's hard to sing. The melody of this piece is simple and lovely. It's very simple. It has the span of about a fourth, maybe a fifth, and doesn't really go to any great, huge climax heights kind of a thing. But the harmony, like, whoa, way makes up for it, and too much in my feeling. It's like overzealous composer trying to show, hey, look what I can do. And I'm all for showing, hey, what I can do, as long as it serves the purpose of presenting a more powerful worship experience in church. And if the music ends up confusing the congregation, can we have a worship experience? Not so much, in my way of thinking. Now, I'm not criticizing Robertson. Fantastic composer. I love his music. It's just more of the context. Who is this music for? What is the purpose of this music? And does it help them in that purpose? In other words, in Sacrament Meeting. Okay, then there's one more instance here towards the end of the second line on Roar. We get very much the same kind of thing across the bar line. The E natural B flat goes down a half step and then a half step. Now that's such a cool technique. You should totally use this technique like in your hymn arrangements, in maybe the piano part of your hymn arrangements, whether it's for choir or for solo voice or for instrument. But with a congregational hymn, that's a tall order. And it's my opinion that that's why we don't ever sing it, because it's just too difficult for the congregation to hold on to. And even when they hear the organ play all the right notes, it makes the melody feel difficult to sing, because what's happening around it is so angular, so this linear chromaticism kind of a thing. So be careful with this technique. Use it for sure. I love this technique. I use this technique quite a lot, but carefully, and I make sure I think about the situation in which I'm using it, and is it going to serve the purpose of the musicians and the audience and why they're listening and what it's for. So keep that in mind. That is your tip today. It was more of a maybe what not to do, but hopefully you got an idea or two about a cool technique of taking a chord and having it sag down half step, half step. It's a very powerful technique. You should definitely use it. Just use it sparingly. You need just a dash of linear chromaticism. If you liked this video, please hit subscribe and ring the bell so you get notified every time a new video posts. And if you liked this, head over to latterdaymusiversity.com to get more free tips. There's a bunch of free downloads and some information about our workshops and other things going on, so you can come and enjoy and try your hand at turning your testimony into song. That is the goal here at Latter Day Musiversity. Thanks, and we'll see you again.